so scared. He was cleaning my car when he found this on a napkin. Now I'm ruined. Hey Reddit, I'm Sarah. I've been a huge fan of this app for a while, but I've never really posted much. It's my first time sharing a story, and I hope this community can offer some understanding. My husband David and I have known each other all our lives. We grew up together, went to school together, and eventually fell in love. It's been 6 years since we got married, and we've always dreamed of starting a family together. David is 34 years old. He's a very talented programmer and makes a very good living working from home. He comes from a wealthy family, so he doesn't have to work as much. I, on the other hand, am 33 years old. I work a regular 9-to-5 job in an office. It's not glamorous, but I've never really wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. Plus, the job gave me time for my affair. We met as children, growing up in the same neighborhood. Our parents were friends, so we spent a lot of time together, playing and exploring the world around us. As we grew older, our bond only grew stronger, and it was no surprise to anyone when we fell in love. One thing that David and I have always dreamed of is starting a family. We didn't have any children yet, but we were hoping to change that in the next few years. We talked about it often, imagining what our children would be like, how we would raise them, and the adventures we would have as a family. Our childhood together was filled with so many memories. We were always getting into mischief, exploring the woods behind our houses and dreaming about the future. David was always the adventurous one, coming up with crazy ideas and dragging me along for the ride. I was more reserved, but I loved his sense of adventure and the way he pushed me out of my comfort zone. One of my earliest memories of David is from when we were about 5 years old. We were playing in the backyard, pretending to be pirates on a grand adventure. David had found an old map in his attic, and he was convinced it led to buried treasure. We spent hours digging in the dirt, searching for treasure that was never there, but it didn't matter. We were together, having the time of our lives. As we grew older, our bond only grew stronger. We went through all the ups and downs of childhood together, supporting each other through thick and thin. We were there for each other's first crushes, first heartbreaks, and everything in between. Our friendship was the foundation of everything we would become, and I'm so grateful for it. High school brought its own set of challenges, but we faced them together. David was always the smart one, acing his exams without even trying. I, on the other hand, had to work hard for my grades, but David was always there to help me study and encourage me to do my best. He believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and I'm forever grateful for that. It was during our high school years that our relationship started to change. We went through our awkward teenage years together, supporting each other through the ups and downs of high school. And when we finally admitted our feelings for each other, it was like everything clicked into place. We began to see each other in a new light, and what had once been a close friendship blossomed into something more. It was a scary and exciting time for both of us, but we knew deep down that we were meant to be together. After high school, we went our separate ways for a while, each pursuing our own dreams and aspirations. David went off to college to study computer science, while I stayed behind to work and save up for my own education. Despite the distance, we stayed in touch, talking on the phone for hours and visiting each other whenever we could. Our love has been a constant source of strength and joy in my life. David was my rock, always there to support me, to make me laugh, and to hold me when I cried. I can't imagine my life without him, and I'm so grateful for the life we've built together. I regret what I did, honestly. David is never going to forgive me. After we both graduated, we decided to take the next step in our relationship and move in together. It was a big decision, but we knew it was the right one. Living together brought us even closer, and we quickly settled into a comfortable routine. David continued to work in the tech industry, while I found a job in an office working 9 to 5. As the years went by, our love only grew stronger. We supported each other through all of life's ups and downs, celebrating each other's successes and comforting each other in times of need. David was my rock, always there to lift me up when I was feeling down and to make me laugh when I needed it most. After a few years of living together, David finally popped the question, and of course I said yes. We were married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by our friends and family, and it was the happiest day of my life. I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, as long as I had David by my side, I could face anything. Our journey together has been filled with love, laughter, and countless memories. David is my soulmate, my best friend, and the love of my life. I can't imagine my life without him. 6 years into our marriage, everything seemed perfect. We were making really good money, We loved each other deeply, and we made sure to have regular date nights to keep the spark alive. Life couldn't have been better. Until I messed it all up, that is. The only issue in our marriage was my dissatisfaction with David's sexual performance. It's not that he was bad, but he wasn't exceptional either. I hate to admit it, but I felt like he was just there, going through the motions, like he was just there and his tool was, well, average. His performance matched his size, average. For a long time, I wondered what it would be like to be with someone, bigger. David was attentive and caring, and he always made sure I was satisfied. But there was something missing, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I know it sounds shallow, but it was something that weighed on my mind. I loved David, and I was happy with our life together, but I couldn't shake the curiosity about what else was out there. I tried to push these thoughts aside, to focus on the good in our relationship, but they lingered in the back of my mind, nagging at me. I tried to push these thoughts aside, to focus on the love and connection David and I shared. But the more I tried to ignore them, the more they crept into my mind. I felt guilty for even thinking about it, for wanting something more when I had such a wonderful husband who loved me unconditionally. But the thoughts persisted, gnawing at me from the inside. I tried to bury them under the facade of a happy marriage, but they refused to stay hidden. I knew I had to address them, but I was scared of what it might mean for my marriage, for David. I kept telling myself that it was just a phase, that it would pass with time. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was craving something more, something different, and I didn't know how to reconcile that with the life I had built with David. Other than that, our life together was mostly smooth sailing, with the occasional bump in the road. We had our disagreements and arguments like any couple, but we were always able to work through them, or so I thought. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, to distract myself from it. I even tried to incorporate different things into our sexual life to spice it up. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the curiosity that lingered in the back of my mind. Looking back now, I know it was my fault. I was so blinded by my desire for something more that I didn't see the damage I was causing. It was around that time that a new coworker came into the picture. He was young, handsome, and charming, and it seemed like everyone in the office was drawn to him. They picked me to train him, and I was fine with that. I saw it as an opportunity to focus on something else, to distract myself from my own thoughts. At first, everything seemed normal. He was eager to learn and seemed genuinely interested in the work. But then I started noticing little things, like how he would go out of his way to be overly nice to me. He would bring me lunch, bring me coffee, help me with tasks even when I didn't ask for it. He would volunteer to stay overtime and help me with projects, even though he had no obligation to do so. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured he was just trying to make a good impression, to show that he was a hard worker. But as time went on, his behavior became more and more obvious. He would find excuses to be near me, to touch me in subtle ways that made my skin tingle. He would compliment me, telling me how smart and beautiful I was, how lucky David was to have me. I tried to ignore it, to brush it off as harmless flirtation. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I could feel the tension building between us, a dangerous spark that threatened to ignite at any moment. And as much as I tried to resist it, I found myself drawn to him, to the thrill of the forbidden. I knew I was playing with fire, that I was risking everything I had with David for a fleeting moment of excitement. But I was too curious, too blinded by my own desires to see the danger I was in. His name was Jaden, and the attraction between us was undeniable. I tried to avoid it, to resist the temptation, but honestly, I did a half-assed job at it. There was something about him, something magnetic and intoxicating that drew me to him like a moth to a flame. I knew I should have reported his behavior to HR, that I should have put a stop to it before things went too far. But the truth was, I enjoyed the attention. After years of feeling unsatisfied and unfulfilled, Jaden's compliments and flirtatious gestures were like a breath of fresh air, a validation of my worth and desirability. I told myself that it was harmless, that I was just indulging in a harmless fantasy. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I was playing with fire, risking everything I had with David for a taste of something new and exciting. Despite my best intentions, I found myself continuing to flirt with Jaden. I knew it was wrong, that I was risking everything I had with David for a fleeting moment of excitement. But there was something about Jaden, something intoxicating and irresistible that drew me to him like a moth to a flame. I tried to avoid him, to stay away from situations where we would be alone together. But that wasn't really feasible, as Jaden worked in the same department as me, and our jobs often required us to work closely together. And to make matters worse, Jaden was incredibly charismatic, with a charm that was impossible to resist. It was as if there was this unusual magnet pulling me towards him, no matter how hard I tried to fight it. I want to make it clear that I still love David with all my heart and wouldn't trade him for anything in the world. He was my rock, my soulmate, and the love of my life. But there was just this underlying curiosity, this desire to experience something new and exciting. I knew it was selfish and reckless, but I couldn't help myself. I just wanted a taste, a 1-minute piece of this guy to see what he tasted like and then bounce. I knew it was wrong, but the thrill of the forbidden was too strong to resist. And then a rumor started going around at work. I'm not even sure how it started, but suddenly everyone was talking about it. The rumor was that David had a huge tool. Now let me give you some context. The place where I work is quite huge, not like HR nightmarish huge, but still big enough that there are lots of employees. Despite the size, we're a tight-knit family and tend to all like each other. It was during one of our girls' nights out that the rumor really took off. Some of the girls at work had slept with Jaden. I know it sounds crazy, especially considering he was flirting with me while still sleeping with other girls at the office. But that's beside the point. The girls who had slept with him started talking about him, and somehow, the topic of his endowment came up. They said he had a really huge tool and that he was really, really good in bed. They talked about it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, laughing and joking as if they were discussing the weather. The rumor spread like wildfire through the office, fueled by gossip and speculation. Now, mind you, while all this was happening, Jaden knew I was married. Funny, or should I say sadly enough, he also had a girlfriend. In fact, they lived together, and I only found this out from one of the other girls he had slept with. But either way, the rumors continued that Jaden had a big tool, and I started getting really curious. Considering my husband's size and the fact that I've always wondered what it would be like to try something else, if I should put it like that. I know now that what I did was so wrong, but back then, I just really, really wanted a taste, and then I became intoxicated with it. So, like every other office rumor, the rumor came and went, but I was still very, very curious about it. Things continued for a while, the flirting, the back and forth between me and Jaden. We would flirt with each other, pretending that we weren't, dancing around the attraction that simmered between us. It was like a game, a dangerous game that I knew I should stop playing, but I couldn't help myself. Despite my better judgment, I found myself drawn to Jaden, drawn to the excitement and thrill of the forbidden. I knew it was wrong, that I was risking everything I had with David for a fleeting moment of pleasure. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the tantalizing promise of something new and exciting, something that I couldn't resist. I decided to be a little more friendly with Jaden, which now I know was really, really wrong, and I honestly don't have any excuses for what I did, to be honest. Looking back, I shouldn't have even been friendly with him in the first place while I was training him, but what's done is done. I extended an olive branch to him, starting to thank him for what he would bring me. If he brought me coffee, I would thank him. If he brought me lunch, I would thank him, stuff like that. I started appreciating him, not just for the things he did for me, but for who he was. I started dressing up well to suit his taste because honestly, I enjoyed the compliments. And that was when we started talking on the phone. We had each other's numbers and even each other's Discord, but we had never really talked much because I never replied to his messages. And I guess he really didn't want to bother me much. But now, I started replying to his messages, and we started chatting more. We found out we had a lot in common, liked a lot of the same stuff. It was easy to talk to him, to laugh with him, to share little moments of our day. It was like we had known each other for years, even though we had only just met. We had so much in common, Jaden and I. He was just so charismatic and easy to talk to. I found myself getting lost in our conversations, forgetting for a moment that I was a whole-ass married woman. It was as if I was back in college again, back in high school again, when life was simpler and full of possibilities. I'll admit it now, I did cheat on my husband back then in college. He doesn't even know because, well, I never told him. I was a little more careful back then. We went to different colleges, and I made sure to cover my tracks. My husband came from a very well-privileged family. He went to this huge, prestigious university, while on the other hand, I had to stay back and save up for my education. Of course, my husband suggested paying for me, but I refused. I wanted to be independent, and deep down, I really didn't want to go to the same university as him. There's this thing about going into college with a relationship. It kind of constricts you. A lot of the things that people usually do in college, you won't be able to do them. Go to parties, have random hookups and stuff like that because you're trying to be loyal to someone. It was just hard. I cheated on him a lot of times, but he never found out. Well, until this incident with Jaden. Anyways, it was as if I was back in college again, enjoying my college days, reliving the thrill of being young and free. At that point, my husband started noticing that I was becoming very distracted with my phone. I mean, how couldn't he? I was on my phone texting away all day, morning and night. The only exception was when I was in the office because I got to see Jaden face to face. But every other time, at home or anywhere else, I was on my phone 24 hours chatting with him about something. My husband noticed this and tried to talk to me about it, but I just brushed him off. I told him things were fine and that I was just a lot more distracted with my phone than usual. I felt guilty for lying to him, for betraying his trust, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I was addicted to the thrill of talking to Jaden, to the excitement of our secret conversations. After about a week of chatting, Jaden and I started hanging out outside of work. We would meet up for coffee or lunch, always careful to keep our meetings secret. It was exhilarating, meeting up with him, knowing that what we were doing was wrong but not caring. The attraction between us was undeniable, and I found myself drawn to him more and more with each passing day. I knew I was playing with fire, risking everything I had with my husband for a moment of excitement. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the thrill of the forbidden, the exhilaration of being with someone new and exciting. Jaden and I would hang out for a while. At first, it was just short hangouts because we couldn't go to his house as he lived with his girlfriend, and we couldn't go to my house because my husband was always home. However, soon we started hanging out more and more, and before we knew it, we were hanging out for hours. We would go to the cinema to watch a movie, and we would touch each other here or there, but never taking things further than that. It was as if there was this force pushing us to cross these boundaries, and one day, we finally did. On that lucky, or should I say, unfortunate day, Jaden's girlfriend was out for the weekend and invited me over to watch a movie. I went excitedly, knowing that this was our chance to be together without any interruptions. My husband was at home, so Jaden and I couldn't go there, and thankfully his girlfriend was out for the weekend. That's where me working a 9-to-5 job came in handy because I started telling my husband I was working overtime just so I could hang out with Jaden. I would go on dates with him, go see a movie with him, all the while telling my husband I was working overtime and stuff like that. So I went over to Jaden's house to watch the movie. It started off fine. We watched the movie and we really liked it. It was very interesting and very emotional. And well, in between that we kissed. We started making out, unable to resist the attraction that had been building between us for so long. Things progressed pretty quickly between me and Jaden. Before I knew it, I had made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I slept with Jaden. Of course, I was horrified. I'm not that callous. I regretted this. I knew what I had done was wrong, but it was honestly good. My husband has always been average. His performance averaged, but Jaden was extra large, and his performance was just so much better. Not that my husband is bad, though, but I mean, you get what I mean. It was as if my eyes had been opened to a world of new possibilities. I knew I had messed up big time, but a part of me couldn't help but feel exhilarated by the experience. It was like I had been living in black and white, and suddenly I was seeing the world in color. Jaden had awakened something in me, something that I had never experienced before. But of course, the guilt soon set in. I knew I had betrayed my husband in the worst possible way. I had broken his trust, shattered our marriage vows. And for what? A moment of pleasure? It wasn't worth it. It would never be worth it. I immediately regretted it. I knew I had to leave, so I picked up my stuff and I left. I headed home feeling so guilty. My husband thought I was working overtime when actually I had just cheated on him. I felt really guilty. I even suggested cooking dinner that night, even though my husband was usually the one that handled the house chores since he worked from home. He was surprised but fine with it. I was extra attentive to his needs that night. I think my husband must have even noticed it, and he asked me if anything was wrong, but I told him it was not. He even mentioned that I wasn't on my phone as usual, and I told him that I wanted to take a break from phones that night. The next day I went to work, and well, Jaden was there, just being himself, being nice, complimenting me, trying to strike a conversation with me. He told me it's not my fault, and maybe I shouldn't have believed him, but I honestly needed someone else to take the blame. Jaden had a way of making everything seem fine and bright and sunny. He had a way of making you forget your problems and your biggest troubles. He was just really charismatic. It didn't even take me up to a week before I fell for him again. And before I knew it, Jaden and I were having a full-blown affair. I would tell my husband I was working overtime when actually I was going to be with Jaden. It was extra hard for us because Jaden stayed with his girlfriend. They lived together, so we couldn't go to my house because my husband worked from home, and we couldn't go to Jaden's house because his girlfriend lived with him. She ran an online business too, so she rarely ever left the house, except if she wanted to do deliveries by herself, or if she was hanging out with friends and stuff like that. Jaden and I didn't want to risk going over to his house because what if his girlfriend then came back sooner than she said she would? I didn't want to be embarrassed by anything or be caught with someone else's boyfriend, so we stayed clear of Jaden's house. At first, we would rent hotels, but there was also the fear of someone seeing us in the hotels or entering the hotel. What if I entered a hotel with Jaden and my husband's brother or sister or relative saw us? What would I say? I would have absolutely no excuse. We tried to be careful, meeting up in secluded spots or going out of town for our rendezvous. But the fear of being caught was always there, hanging over us like a dark cloud. And yet the thrill of being with Jaden, of experiencing something new and exciting, was too strong to resist. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but in those moments with Jaden, none of that seemed to matter. All that mattered was the rush of adrenaline, the excitement of the forbidden, the thrill of being with someone who made me feel alive again. So we started using my car. Sometimes we would be intimate in Jaden's car, and other times in my car. We always switched. It was much easier that way, as we could just wait for everyone to leave the office and be the last ones to leave. We would then find a secluded spot and indulge in our affair. But as they say, once you stop focusing on something else and stop putting in the work, like once you stop focusing on your relationship or marriage and you stop putting in the work and the effort, you start unconsciously distancing yourself from your partner. And that was what I was doing with my husband. I started unconsciously distancing myself from him. We weren't as close as before. We weren't going on date nights as much as we used to, because I would come back from going out with Jaden and I would just tell my husband I was tired, and we would just cancel the date nights for the night. Of course, my husband was confused. He honestly tried his best. He fought for our relationship, but I just regret it so much because it was as if I was just watching my husband fight for our relationship and I was just so far gone. I was so invested in Jaden that I didn't even pay attention to my husband or to my marriage. It's funny how you can be so blind to what's right in front of you. My husband was there trying his best to make our marriage work, and I was off with Jaden, living in a fantasy world. I didn't realize how much I was hurting my husband until it was too late, and by then the damage was done. I wish I could go back and change things, but I can't. All I can do now is try to make things easier for my husband when we eventually meet in court for divorce as a way to try and repair the damage I've done. But I know it won't be easy. Trust once broken is hard to mend, and I don't know if my husband will ever be able to trust me again and even just be friends with me. So things continued for a while. I continued my affair with Jaden. In fact, it started to become a regular routine. I won't lie to you. I started to become sloppy in the way I was hiding my affair. I reckoned that if my husband didn't notice anything, then there was no need in being extra sneaky. I started becoming lazy. I started becoming sloppy. I was withdrawing from my marriage. Everything was just kind of falling apart around me and I didn't really notice. Also, I started to unconsciously distance myself from my friends and family. I stopped going out with them, stopped calling them, stopped checking up on them. My whole world was consumed by my affair with Jaden, and I didn't realize how much I was neglecting everything else in my life. But as they say, the truth always has a way of coming out. And for me, it came out in the most unexpected way. One day, my husband decided to clean my car. He was always so thoughtful and caring, always doing little things to make my life easier. I was really tired. I was just too tired. I guess I seemed a little lazy that day. I had forgotten to discard the napkin and the condom that Jaden and I used. It was still in the car. I felt a little too lazy to go to the car wash, so my husband was just like, you know what? Let me just wash the car for you because it's been a while. So my husband gets the hose and stuff like that to go wash the car, and I'm just resting in bed for like 5 minutes until I hear my husband scream. I honestly thought he had seen a snake or something, so I ran out to meet him only to see that my husband was holding the napkin in which I had put the condom that Jaden and I had used. It was an extra large size because, like I said before, Jaden has a huge tool, so that was how I fucked up my marriage. My husband looked like he was about to cry. When my husband found the condom, I was stunned. I tried to explain, to convince him that it wasn't what it looked like, but my words came out all wrong. He just stood there, holding it, his eyes filled with hurt and anger. I felt like the worst person in the world. In a last-ditch effort to fix things, I started to spin a story. I told him it wasn't me, that it must have been someone else. I even thought about getting a coworker to lie for me. My female coworkers are big on the girl code stuff, and since I'm close to a lot of them, they would have immediately lied for me if I called them in front of my husband. But deep down, I knew that wouldn't fix anything. My husband deserved the truth, no matter how much it hurt. But he didn't believe me. He accused me of lying, of breaking his trust. He looked so hurt, so crushed, that I couldn't stand it. I tried to explain, to make him see that it was a mistake, that I still loved him. But he just walked away, leaving me standing there, feeling lower than low. My husband's words hit me like a ton of bricks. He stood there, seething with anger, and told me to get the hell out of his house. He called me a betrayer and said he couldn't believe that while he was trying his hardest to fix our marriage, I was off having sex with someone else in the car he bought for me. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. All this time, he'd been trying to understand why we weren't as close as before, and I'd been betraying him. The guilt and shame washed over me, knowing that I'd destroyed everything we had. As he walked away, I knew there was nothing I could say to make it right. I had messed up, big time, and now I had to face the consequences. After my husband stormed out, I didn't even have the guts to call him back. I just sat there, feeling the weight of my shame crushing down on me. I knew this was all my fault, that I had messed up big time. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, my phone rang. It was Jaden. I picked up, my anger boiling over. I cursed at him, screamed at him, told him I never wanted to see his face again, not even at work. I couldn't bring myself to leave. Despite everything, I wanted to salvage my marriage. So I waited for my husband to return. When he finally came back about 5 hours later, he was genuinely surprised to see me still there. He asked why I hadn't left as he had told me to. I tried to apologize again, but he wouldn't listen. Eventually, he agreed to hear me out. I told him everything about my affair with Jaden, how it started, and all the moments I had shared with him. I admitted that I was curious and wanted to experience something different, but I regretted it deeply. My husband listened, but his decision was clear. He said he needed time to think and asked me to leave. I tried to plead with him, hoping he would forgive me, but he was firm. He told me he needed space and that there was no way he was leaving his house for me. I realized then that he was serious, that he might never forgive me. I packed up my things, feeling a deep sense of loss. He wouldn't even let me take the car he had bought for me. I called an Uber, knowing that this might be the end of our relationship. Despite everything, I still held on to a tiny modicum of hope that my husband might forgive me. We had been together all our life, and I couldn't imagine life without him. He was my best friend, my companion, my all-in-one. We had known each other since childhood, so how could he just not forgive me? As a show of faith to my husband, I decided to quit my job. I packed up my stuff and called an Uber, heading to my parents' house. Thankfully, they were understanding. I didn't lie to them. I told them the truth about my affair. They were very angry because they loved my husband as if he were their own son. But they were also my parents, and they couldn't just discard me like that. They had to let me in. Thankfully, my parents let me in, or I would have been homeless. As soon as I arrived, I called my boss and resigned on the spot. He was surprised. I hadn't given any notice. I explained it was an emergency and apologized. I loved my job, but I had to leave to avoid seeing Jaden if I ever wanted my husband to forgive me. I told my boss I'd collect my things later. Thankfully, I didn't have really important stuff at the office. In fact, most of the stuff there was just work I would have had to turn in anyways. My husband wasted no time in crippling me financially. Within days, he cleared out our joint account, leaving me with only about 20% of the money. Most of the money was his, but it felt cruel. That was a harsh reality check. Once the money was gone, I realized he would never take me back. Everyone tried to help. My parents, even my siblings, called him to plead on my behalf. But cheating was a line that couldn't be crossed. Even they couldn't forgive a cheater. No. Losing my husband feels like the ultimate punishment for my infidelity. We hardly talk now, and when we do, it's strained. He hasn't blocked me, so I still send him messages, trying to keep the lines of communication open until the divorce is finalized. I've promised him that I'll make the divorce process as smooth as possible by signing every paper without hesitation. I know what I did was wrong, and I'm trying to make amends in any way I can. I've been actively searching for remote jobs because honestly, I'm sick of 9-to-5 jobs. If I had been working from home to begin with, I might never have crossed paths with Jaden, and my marriage might still be intact. But life doesn't offer do-overs, and you get what you give. Of course, I couldn't just let Jaden go scot-free. I knew I had to make things right, at least to some extent. Jaden, the person who helped me ruin my marriage, couldn't just get away with it. I found Jaden's girlfriend on Facebook, as Jaden was quite public about their relationship. I sent her a text informing her about Jaden's infidelity and attached screenshots of our messages as proof. After that, I logged out of Facebook and blocked Jaden on every platform, including my calls. So even if he tried to reach out to me, I wouldn't even notice. It was a small gesture, but I felt it was necessary. I had to take responsibility for my actions and ensure that Jaden faced some consequences for his role in the affair. I felt like sharing my story here because I know this community can be really understanding. So thank you for listening.
Husband that I was seeing someone else. He thinks he's justified to ruin my life. My mom just ruined my whole life. She told my husband I was seeing someone else. Now my husband thinks he's justified to ruin my life. He ruined my life and he thinks it's right. This all happened because of my mother. If only she hadn't ran her mouth like a tap, my life wouldn't have been ruined. She caused all of it all because she wanted a piece of my husband. Now, whose mother in the whole damn wide world wants to sleep with their daughter's husband? I know there are a lot of mothers that could do that, so no need to answer that. But can you imagine her audacity? The buxom, blotched witch told my husband I was seeing someone else because she thought that would get her a chance with my husband. And for those of y'all that would come for me in the comments asking why I was seeing someone else when I was married, I would advise you to shut it. If I was seeing someone else while I was married to my husband, did that give him the justification to carry out revenge in such a manner? He was actually the whole cause of it. Okay, my tattletale of a mother was the cause of it, but my husband had been the one to initiate the events that led to me seeing someone else. Before we got married, my husband had told me that he just wanted us to be married for just about 2 years so he could inherit his father's property. I had agreed because he had promised me a fair compensation and then anything I needed. That day had looked like a dream come through to me. I mean, who offered to give you about $50,000 just to pretend to be married to him for 2 years? These were the stuff we read in romance novels that had made us swoon and sigh, and it was finally happening to me in real life. Of course, I was going to grab the opportunity. I just didn't know the opportunity would cost an arm and a leg and my whole internal body organs before it came to an end. Lol, I'm kidding, there was no loss of any body organs. But there was mental depression from terrible ruination that my husband kickstarted in my life. All because I saw someone else during our marriage. He thought he was justified to ruin my life. Let me tell you all how the ruination my husband set for me started. My name is Mika and I'm 27 years old. My husband's name is Darren and he is 30 years old. How I met my husband? Well, I was working as an on-the-field realtor. Yeah, that meant I got to show people the properties they wanted to acquire. I was still starting up in the real estate agency, so the higher-ups gave me their hectic chores to do and stuff. On one of the occasions of showing prospective buyers some property, that's how I met my husband. Yeah, he was one of the prospective buyers. We hit it off as cool friends, and one day he invited me for their family dinner party, and that's when I knew the guy was loaded. Apparently, he didn't want to stay in their huge family mansion anymore because they were pressuring him to get married. My own mother couldn't care what I did with my life so far as I dropped her monthly mother's allowance for raising me. She had no qualms with me getting married or having children. After all, she had been married 5 times, and none of them favored her, so she wasn't going to push me. Those had been her words, not mine. Back to what I was saying. So my husband took me for dinner with his family, and his parents absolutely loved me. I am a lovely person, so that was expected. What I didn't expect was 2 weeks after the dinner, my husband sent for a car to bring me to his office and asked me to marry him there and then. Yeah, there was no romantic candlelit dinner with a "Will you marry me" sign on the wall. It was just pump and plain with my husband. When he had told me just like that, I had thought him mad and almost stomped out of his office. But then he started rolling out the benefits of getting married to him for just 2 years, and I was hooked. Like I said earlier, it was like it had been something from a romance novel you couldn't put down. After he listed out the compensation I would be getting from marrying him, I didn't even waste any time, and I said yes. I accepted the deal. It was a sweet, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but it definitely cost me a great deal later on. Our wedding was a blur. His parents had been happy that their son was getting married. As for my mom, the only family I had, she couldn't even be bothered to show up that day. Well, my husband and I got married and we began living our lives. All these took place within the space of 2 weeks. I kid you not. We started living with each other without knowing anything about each other. So we were bound to quarrel, and I shouldn't have been surprised when the hostility started building up. I wouldn't say I resented him, but we just didn't fit. Apart from that, it was like he had no emotions. Like he couldn't be bothered to even talk to me or find out that I was still existing. It had been exhausting, but I was getting paid for being married to him, and he bought me expensive items. Maybe so I wouldn't change my mind or something. But then the experience became too hellish for me, and he hadn't specified what we were to do while we were married. I had endured for 1 year and 3 months, and I had just decided to step out a little LOL. My big mistake had been telling my mother. It hadn't been like I had told her, but she had caught me and I had to explain. That had been my biggest mistake. If not, my husband wouldn't have caught me. After about 1 year and 3 months of being faithful to a husband who hadn't seemed to care about me except throwing gifts in my way whenever I grumbled too much, I decided to live a nonchalant life. There had been no conditions when we had agreed to get married, so I thought to myself that there would be no issue if I dabbled around, and besides, he wouldn't catch me. He was always on trips. I was still contemplating taking the step to dabble in extramarital affairs. I hadn't wanted to be that girl. I hadn't wanted to be my mom. Then I had to go and bump into the only man I had ever loved at a coffee shop, and all thoughts of not cheating on my husband vanished from my head. He didn't care about me, and he could very well have been cheating on me with whomever when he was on his work trips. Besides, as I said before, he hadn't said anything about having sex outside our marriage. I mean, I could do what I wanted. Anyway, I bumped into someone I had always seen myself marrying, and the experience from then on till I was tattled out was amazing. He treated me like how you treat Queen Elizabeth when she comes to visit. Of course, he didn't know I was married, LOL, but I never planned on telling him. He had just made money and was glad that he found me again. Our story had ended quite quickly because he had gone to serve in the military, and I couldn't commit to a relationship where I didn't know if he was going to end up dead or alive each time he got deployed. But when I bumped into him at the coffee shop, he had served in the military and was now working in a classified position. I couldn't believe he had somehow made his way back into my life, and I had a husband who didn't give 2 shits about me. So don't blame me because I went straight into the man's arms that gave good dick and treated me like I was an egg. Everything was great. My husband was unaware and ignorant and so focused on his business while I was enjoying the attention of another man. I thought he was never going to find out. I even thought that if he found out, he wasn't going to do anything about it as long as our arrangement wasn't compromised. Yeah, delusional, right? My husband should have never been justified to ruin my life because I was sleeping with another man. He should never have even found out if it weren't for my mother. Now that I think about it, I hate that woman with my soul. She brought about all this. One fateful day when my husband was on a business trip. My lover had brought me home. I told him the house belonged to my late dad. And behold, my mother was standing at my front door, eyeing me wearily. I was so tongue-tied because before that day, I hadn't seen her in over 1 year, and she just showed up to my door late at night. She had asked me who was the man I was with, and I knew for sure she was going to call me out that I was a married woman, and except she had gone blind, the fella I was with didn't look anything like my husband. I thought for certain that was what was going to happen, but she shocked me again. My lover got the cue that she was my mother, we look alike, and greeted her and began confessing that I was the love of his life. Gag! My mother had just nodded her head and ordered me to open the door. Of course I did immediately, but my hands were shaking, thinking my moment of retribution was coming before my lover could leave. But nothing strange happened. My mother just stepped into my house and went straight to bed in the guest bedroom. The sigh of relief that had left me at that moment was loud, but I hadn't known my moment of retribution was stacking up. My mother began staying with us, so I couldn't comfortably sneak out to go see my lover, and then my husband came back from his trip. I started working on eggshells around them, and my lover had to become too demanding. Usually after work, I would go spend the rest of the day with him till late evening or even the next morning. But with my mother living with me and my husband back from his trip, everywhere had been so tight. My lover started showing up at my workplace and had the audacity to show up at my house. I regretted giving my house address or showing him where I lived at that instance. Luckily, my husband had been away that day, but my mother had been watching once again. Well, I had managed to dodge that bullet by telling my lover that I could only come to see him and not the other way round. I lied that my father was back at the mansion and he would shoot his head if he saw him. Which was half the truth, lol. My husband, not my father, was going to have his head if he saw him. I knew that for sure. Like I said, I had managed to prevent my lover and my husband from running into each other. I hadn't known my mom was going to be the trap that had been sent from hell. Apparently, she had the hots for my husband. Why would my mother have the hots for my husband, whom she was almost older than by 2 decades? And it's not like I hadn't seen the signs. I had seen the signs, but I had thought I was just reading meaning into things. In my head, I was like, there was no way my mother would have those types of feelings for my husband. But then my husband began to complain that my mother gave him weird vibes. According to him, he would be coming out of the shower and he would find my mother in the room under the pretense that she was looking for me or looking for something. All that started as she came to visit, but before that, she would ask me weird questions like how good my husband was in bed and if he had a huge tool. Completely weird stuff that I shouldn't have overlooked, but I had thought she was my mother, and as I didn't have any sister, it was normal to divulge this information. Big mistake. She wanted a piece of him, and my husband told me I needed to get her out of his house before he did something worse. And I knew my husband, y'all, he was going to make good on his threat. So I totally forgot she had caught me with someone that wasn't my husband in my matrimonial home. And I made another big mistake. I kicked her out. Yes, I threw my mother out of the house and she decided to pay back big time. I hadn't expected it. Before my mother tattletaled on me, I had broken things up with my lover. Actually, he had been the one to break things up with me. LOL. He had said he wanted someone more present in our relationship, and I was like, good riddance. Our dynamic hadn't been as good as back then, and I was a married woman. My husband was more present than before, and I didn't want to have an affair. I didn't have the strength, quite frankly. It was like my husband was finally seeing me for who I was, the person he had married. I know I had blamed him earlier for not being present, but he became more caring as time went on. This was after I had kicked my mother out of our house. Maybe it was because our contract was almost up, or I don't know what inspired his change of heart. But I guess I can say I had fallen in love with my husband at that moment before the fire lit up, and he felt justified to ruin my life. He picked me up after work, got me my favorite treats, took me to see my favorite games. I couldn't believe it, and I know you're hoping the guilt of me having an affair must have been eating me up then. But it was not. What if he had only been acting nice to make up for the atrocity he had committed? It was quite possible, but I never got to find out if he was genuine or not because the fire happened soon right after. Give or take, my mom came back 3 weeks later to enact her revenge. Here's how the beginning of my problem happened. My husband got back from work on an evening. I was already home from work, so I had prepped his meal and, everything that would make him happy, because I thought all was well and we were finally moving into the happy couple stage that could stand each other's presence. I didn't know I was in trouble, and all was anything but well. My husband had banged the door to announce his presence, and I knew something was up then, but I had thought it was work-related. Before I blinked my eyes and opened them, my husband stood in front of me and slammed some pictures down on the seat where I occupied. You guys, the pictures were of me and my affair. I was shocked and couldn't speak until my husband spoke up and told me that my mother had personally delivered these pictures to his office. How she had gotten the pictures? I had no idea, but that night my husband tore into me like never before. According to him, he hadn't wanted to believe my mother when she came to him with talks that I was having an affair and was going to call the police on her when she produced evidence to her claim that I was indeed seeing someone outside our marriage. He called me all sorts of names. Stupid was one of the recurring ones. I just had one job, in his own words, to stay married to him for 2 years to get his inheritance, to keep myself in check. What if my mother had gone to his parents with evidence of me cheating, then he would have lost his inheritance? What if some paparazzi had caught it or something had happened that had exposed me having an affair and led people to prod and find out our marriage was arranged? Had I told my mother our marriage was a sham? Why couldn't I hold off the affair a little longer then? In the next 7 months we'll be done. My dears, these and many more had been the questions my husband had hammered into me that night. but of course I hope you didn't expect me to keep quiet as he was trying to make me feel small. I reciprocated his energy. I told him when we had gotten married, he hadn't made any stipulations on extramarital affairs clear, and he was always gone so much. How was I supposed to be sure that he wasn't cheating on me? He called me stupid again at that point and couldn't believe he had actually gotten married to me. Well, that night he threw me out of his house. I didn't speak to my husband for about 2 weeks, and in those 2 weeks I had the worst news, guys. I found out that I was pregnant. Yeah, the same question of if it was for my husband or for my affair. Trust me, I wondered that too. But when I had gone to the OBGYN, I found out I was just 3 weeks along then. So it was my husband's. The problem was how I was going to tell him I was carrying his child. Our contract still had about 6 months left, and with the way he wasn't talking to me, I had feared that he was going to call it off and not compensate me again. That's what I had feared. What I hadn't known was how he was going to turn everything around and ruin me completely. After 2 weeks of not seeing my husband and wondering what was going to happen, my husband barged into the hotel room I was staying temporarily and flung divorce papers in my face. How he had known where I was staying, I didn't know once again. He had flung the divorce papers in my face and said our sham was up. My mother, the tattletale, had gone to his parents and told them that I had an affair while being married to their son. His parents had then done some digging around and found out that we had signed an agreement contract before getting married. As punishment, my husband wasn't going to get his inheritance for another 3 years. With that news, I couldn't even bring myself to tell him that I was pregnant. So I wasn't going to get any compensation, and he had seized everything he had ever gotten me as gifts. I had thought he would end there. Why had my husband felt justified to ruin my life when I hadn't been the one to bring about the cause of his problems directly? Shouldn't he have targeted my mother, who had caused all our problems? But he didn't target my mother. He targeted me. Fast forward 3 months later, I was doing well in my work with my baby bump not showing, but that was beside the point. Tell me why my husband hadn't moved on. He bought the agency where I worked, and when he had been announced as the new boss, I had thought I would faint. I was hiding his child from him, so of course I was scared. Do you want to know what my husband did as he took over my company? He fired me, right then and there when I hadn't even done anything. My husband fired me from my workplace. It had been so unexpected because I just finished using my last salary to rent a house. I didn't have any savings. I had nothing to my name because he had already taken everything from me. Well, I had left the agency with my tail between my legs. I got a job at a bakery 2 weeks later and was packing up shifts to be able to cater for myself and save up to have my baby. My ex-husband walked into the bakery 3 weeks later and caused a scene saying there was a spider leg in his croissant and that he was going to bring the bakery down if the baker responsible wasn't fired. I was the baker on duty that morning. That was how he got me fired. He continued like that. Any job I managed to get, he would somehow get me fired or make the owner to not want me to work for them anymore. It has been madness, and for what reason? Was it because I had agreed to his stupid contract? I wished I never did. I was stressed looking for how to fend for myself and the baby growing in my tummy, and he had just been messing my efforts. I lost my baby. Yeah, you read right. I couldn't cope with the stress, and one day I just slumped and was rushed to the hospital. The doctor told me I had lost my baby and I needed to take it easy as my blood pressure could make me have a heart attack. I decided to cook down, but then my husband continued to make life difficult. I couldn't get a job because my previous experiences showed I was fired within 2 weeks or a month. And it was true. It was like my ex-husband was monitoring me, and whenever I landed a job, he came in to make my life miserable. I had finally had it up to my neck and marched down to his office. Coupled with the frustration of losing my baby and not being able to eat properly or rest, I laid him one. Do you know what he said after I was done? Nothing. He said absolutely nothing and was unbothered. I told him I was just lost our baby and he hadn't even flinched. He hadn't cared about me. He had just cared about his inheritance. I was just a means to an end. I couldn't believe I had seen myself falling for that psychopath one bit. In his own words, I had prevented him from achieving his inheritance when he wanted it. So he felt justified to ruin my life. According to him, it was enough to see that I suffered the rest of my life, and that was what he was going to keep doing. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave the city. I had no other family, and my ex-husband was going to keep it making me miserable. Fuck, he hadn't even cared that I had lost a part of me. How had I agreed to live with such a human? Well, I had learnt my lesson. He made my life terrible and made me lose a baby and felt it was worth it just because I had made him lose his inheritance. He was still going to get back within 3 years. I learnt my lesson, Redditors. I hope you learned from my experience too.